A grieving veteran and his daughter bought an abandoned cabin for just $5, hoping to escape their pain. But what they found beneath the floorboards wasn't dust or old wood. It was a half-dead dog protecting her puppies. And from that moment, everything changed. This isn't just a story about a rescued dog. It's about healing, about how love finds us when we least expect it, sometimes with claws, scars, and a heartbeat that refuses to give up. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? And don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The January wind curled through the Tennessee hills like a ghost, whistling past bare trees and dusting the empty road with fine snow. At the wheel of an old rust-bitten Chevy truck sat Ethan Walker, 51, a military veteran with shoulders still squared like a soldier but eyes dimmed by years of sorrow. His grip on the steering wheel was firm, but his knuckles were white, not from the cold, but from the memories he couldn't shake. Beside him, his 8-year-old daughter, Amelia, sat quietly, hugging a faded stuffed fox named Mr. Buttons. Her cheeks were pale, her long auburn hair tucked messily into the collar of a coat 2 sizes too big. She hadn't spoken much since her mother's funeral 6 months ago, not at school, not at home, and not even when Ethan told her they were moving far away to start over. Their destination rose like a secret between the trees, an old log cabin they'd bought for $5 and a signature. It was supposed to be a fresh beginning, but when the tires crunched to a stop and the silence settled in around them, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, what exactly had they driven into? Ethan stepped out first, the cold nipping at his face as he crunched through ankle-deep snow. The cabin loomed ahead like a memory someone tried to bury its roof, bowed under years of snowfall, logs darkened by time and weather. The real estate listing had described it as rustic, full of charm. He squinted at the sagging porch and tilted chimney. Rustic, he muttered. Right. Amelia followed behind him, boots squeaking softly. Mr. Buttons clutched tight against her chest. She said nothing. She hadn't really said anything since Rachel died. Ethan held the door open, and they stepped into stillness. The cabin smelled of mildew and old ash. Sunlight filtered through cracked windows, dust dancing in the beams like snow caught in amber. A warped sofa leaned in one corner, a wood stove sat cold and silent in the middle, and mismatched mugs lined crooked shelves. Nothing about it was warm, not yet. But Ethan, ever the fixer, saw what could be. He rubbed his palms together, trying to summon hope. It just needs a little love, he said aloud. Amelia didn't look at him. She wandered toward a frosted window, drawing slow circles in the condensation with her finger. Her reflection looked like a ghost, fragile, small, eyes far too old for a child. Ethan stared at her, grief rising in his throat like smoke. This place was supposed to be their restart, but now he wondered if running from the city had only buried them deeper in silence. He began to explore, instincts kicking in like muscle memory. His army days had taught him to scan, to read a room in seconds. The place was quiet, but not abandoned. A cupboard door hung loose. The rug by the stove shifted under his boot. He bent down, fingers brushing the wood. And that's when he saw it. A smear, dark, damp, almost hidden under the dust. He crouched, brushed it away. More streaks muddy, uneven. They trailed toward a gap in the floorboards near the back wall. His spine stiffened. These weren't signs of rot. They were tracks. Animal? Maybe. But they were recent. He called gently over his shoulder. Amelia, stay there. She didn't answer, but he saw her still near the window, hugging Mr. Buttons. Slowly, Ethan knelt closer to the floor. More prints now, bigger than he expected, spread awkwardly. A limp. He listened. At first, just silence. Then he froze. A faint, deliberate scraping, claws on wood, slow, dragging. His heartbeat quickened. Not fear, readiness. This wasn't the battlefield. But something in his chest lit up like it used to when he patrolled enemy lines at night. He reached instinctively for his belt before remembering the pistol was locked away in the truck, a habit hard to shake. Instead, he grabbed a rusted fireplace poker. He pressed his ear closer. Again, the sound, a scratch, a shuffle. Not wind, not branches, something alive. Amelia had moved. She now stood behind him, her wide eyes locked on the floorboards. "Don't come closer," he whispered, his voice low but calm. But she didn't flinch. Her hand found the back of his jacket, a tiny grip trusting. He hadn't felt that in months. Ethan took a breath, slid the poker under the edge of a loose plank, and pried. The wood groaned, cracked, and lifted. A gust of cold, stale air rose up from the space beneath. He braced himself for raccoons, a possum, even a bear, but what he saw instead made his chest seize. There, curled tightly in the dark, was a German shepherd. Her fur was clumped with dried blood and dirt. One leg bent unnaturally. Her ribs jutted through her sides like broken promises. She raised her head weakly, but the moment her eyes met his, she collapsed again. And then, 3 tiny shapes stirred beside her. Puppies, barely old enough to open their eyes. They whimpered softly, nuzzling blindly against their mother's battered side. Ethan forgot the poker. It fell from his grip and clattered to the floor. For all the gunfire he'd faced, for all the chaos he'd known, it was this bleeding, broken animal that undid him. "God," he whispered. The dog bared her teeth not viciously, just enough to warn. Her growl was low, tired, defiant. She wasn't going to let him near without a fight. He recognized that kind of strength. He had seen it in the eyes of fellow soldiers, wounded but unwilling to fall. "Easy, girl," he said gently, crouching lower. And then Amelia moved. Without a word, she stepped forward, dropped to her knees beside him, and stretched out her hand. Ethan turned to stop her, but her voice, quiet, fragile, broke the air like a prayer. "Maple!" Ethan blinked. "What?" She didn't look at him. Her hand was still out, palm up. The dog sniffed it, ears twitching. The growl faded. Not gone, just softer. Amelia whispered again. "Her name is Maple." Ethan watched, breath held. The dog lowered her head into Amelia's small hand. And just like that, the silence between father and daughter cracked. Not shattered, but cracked. And from beneath the floor, the cabin breathed for the first time in years. Ethan carried the wounded shepherd Maple, as Amelia had named her, across the creaky floor and laid her gently near the old stone hearth. Her weight was deceptive. She felt like a bag of bones, all sharp edges and barely their breath. Her eyes, however, still burned with something fierce, something protective. Amelia knelt beside her, cradling the 3 squirming pups in her coat. They made high-pitched mewling sounds, their tiny noses sniffing the warm flannel. Ethan watched his daughter as she worked with slow, instinctive tenderness, whispering soft things to creatures who couldn't yet understand language, but who, somehow, heard her all the same. He couldn't remember the last time she'd touched anyone with that kind of care. For the next few hours, Ethan moved with quiet urgency. His army training came back, not in commands or tactics, but in calm, precise motion. He cleaned Maple's wounds using boiled water and old towels. He found an unopened bag of rice, mixed it with broth, and poured it into a shallow dish. She sniffed it weakly but didn't eat. Her eyes never left the pups. The snow deepened outside, swallowing the cabin in thick silence. By nightfall, the wind howled, rattling the windows and pressing against the walls like a warning. But inside, there was a different kind of storm brewing. Ethan crouched by the fire, feeding another log into the stove when Maple's ears pricked. She lifted her head not much, just a twitch, and let out a deep guttural growl. He froze. The room went still. Amelia looked up from where she lay curled with the pups. "What is it, girl?" Ethan whispered. Maple didn't respond. She didn't need to. The sound came next, a soft crack outside, like a boot pressing down on frozen wood, deliberate, heavy. Ethan stood slowly, heart thudding not with fear, but readiness. He reached for the rusted poker again and crossed the room in 2 strides. Maple was on her feet now too, wobbling slightly, growl growing louder, teeth bared. Amelia clutched Mr. Buttons and the pups tighter. "Stay here," Ethan told her, voice low but steady. Another sound, a knock. No, not a knock, A rattle at the front door, the knob twisted once, twice, then came a voice, muffled through the wood, soaked in smoke and something darker. "Didn't think anyone was dumb enough to stay here," it rasped. Ethan's fingers clenched around the poker. He unlocked the door but didn't open it yet. "Who's there?" The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, it said, "That place don't belong to you." With one sharp motion, Ethan yanked the door open. A man stood on the porch, tall, lanky, shoulders hunched beneath a filthy canvas coat. His beard was patchy, teeth yellow, eyes bloodshot. A hunting knife glinted at his belt. He smirked. "Didn't you read the stories that cabin eats people alive?" Behind him, the forest swallowed the last of the light. Maple lunged forward from the hearth, snarling with a fury that echoed off the logs. The stranger stumbled back a step. Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung the poker not to hit, but to warn, "You need to leave, now." The man didn't flinch. "You're ex-military," he said, voice dripping with disdain. "I can smell it on you. Think that means you can fix this place? Think you can fix her?" He nodded toward Maple. Ethan's jaw locked. The man stepped back off the porch, boots crunching in the snow. "Walk away, soldier," he said, eyes flashing, "before this place finishes what it started." And with that, he disappeared into the woods, vanishing like a breath in winter. Ethan slammed the door shut and bolted it, chest rising and falling. Amelia stared at him, eyes wide. "It's okay," he said, though he didn't believe it. Maple stayed by the door, growling low. Her body, though wounded, stood like a sentry, solid and unafraid. That night, neither Ethan nor the dog slept. He sat by the fire with the poker in hand, watching shadows dance on the cabin walls, wondering what that man had meant. "This place doesn't belong to you." The words gnawed at him like frostbite. But it wasn't just fear he felt. It was something else. A memory. A question. Why had that dog been hidden under their floor? And what else was this place hiding? Because a wounded dog and her pups didn't just wander beneath a forgotten cabin by chance. And now, Ethan was certain of one thing. They hadn't come here alone. The next morning broke cold and gray, the forest still under its thick blanket of snow. Pale light filtered through the cabin windows, casting long shadows across the floorboards, shadows that felt heavier now, like the place itself was holding its breath. Ethan sat at the edge of the sofa, cradling a steaming mug of weak coffee between calloused hands. He hadn't slept. Every time his eyes drifted shut, the man's voice echoed back, "That cabin eats people alive." Maple lay curled near the door, her body still tense, though her breathing had slowed. She hadn't taken her eyes off the window all night. The pups huddled against her belly, twitching and squeaking softly in sleep. Across the room, Amelia had finally dozed off, wrapped in an old quilt, Mr. Buttons tucked under her arm, one hand still resting protectively on the smallest pup. And for the first time since they'd arrived, Ethan didn't know what to do. He'd faced IEDs, street patrols in places where the air itself felt like it could explode. He'd led men through chaos, made decisions with lives hanging in the balance, but nothing in war prepared him for this cracked, haunted little cabin, this silent daughter, this bleeding dog who wouldn't leave the door. He needed air. Stepping outside, Ethan winced as the cold slapped his face. He walked to the shed behind the cabin, hoping for a distraction tools to fix, supplies to count, something to give his mind structure. Inside, he found an old crate of firewood, a rusted axe, and tucked beneath a tarp, a faded wool blanket and a cracked metal dog bowl. Someone had lived here, not just passed through, lived. Back inside, Amelia was awake again. She looked up when he entered, her blue eyes more alert than usual. "She's hungry," she whispered. Ethan nodded, placing the bowl down. "Let's see what we can do." They mixed rice and broth again, setting it near Maple. She sniffed it, wary at first, then began to eat in slow, careful bites. Her ribs still jutted out, but her eyes seemed clearer now, focused. That's when Ethan noticed it on her left ear, just behind the ragged edge of an old scar, something faintly inked beneath the fur. He crouched down, brushing gently aside the matted hair. Numbers? Tattooed? A chill passed through him. He had seen this before. Military. Kind. He exhaled, long and low. You weren't just a stray. Were you? Maple met his gaze then, her amber eyes locking with his. And in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, not of face, but of pain, of purpose. He traced the numbers gently with his thumb. Someone had trained her. She'd served, just like him. Who left you here, he murmured. Who forgot you? Behind him, Amelia whispered. Maybe she wasn't forgotten. Ethan turned. She found us, Amelia said, her voice steadier than it had been in months. Maybe she was waiting. The words struck deeper than he expected. Waiting. Wasn't that what he'd been doing too, waiting for grief to pass, waiting for Amelia to speak again, to laugh, to live, waiting for life to feel like life? He looked around the cabin, the cracked walls, the sagging roof, the floor that had almost caved beneath them, and suddenly he saw it differently. Not a mistake, not a grave, but a beginning. The silence that had surrounded them wasn't emptiness, it had been holding space for healing, for rediscovery. Come here, he said gently. Amelia crossed the room, careful not to wake the pups. Ethan took her small hand in his, placed it over the tattoo behind Maple's ear. She was like me, he said softly. She served. She probably saw things no dog should see, got hurt, was cast aside. But she survived, Amelia whispered. He nodded. So will we. That afternoon, as the fire crackled and the wind beat against the windows, Ethan opened the trap door again and climbed down into the small crawl space where they had first found Maple. The floor was cold, the air stale. He brought a lantern this time, letting its light sweep across the corners. Something glinted in the dust. He reached for it. A button. Red, fabric still attached. He frowned, brushing away dirt. It was part of a scarf, the stitching, sloppy, uneven, familiar. He held it up to the light, and his chest clenched. Rachel. It was hers. She'd worn it the day of the crash. The day she died. He staggered back, legs nearly giving out. How had it gotten here? He climbed out of the crawl space slowly, scarf clutched tight in his fist. Amelia was waiting. Her eyes fell to the fabric, her face crumpled. That's Mom's, she said, barely above a breath. Ethan could only nod, afraid if he spoke, his voice would break. Later that night, long after Amelia had fallen asleep beside the pups, Ethan sat alone by the fire. The scarf lay across his knees. Maple rested nearby, one eye open, ears twitching. He didn't need answers. Not tonight. Just this moment, this breath, this warmth. Maybe Maple hadn't just found them. Maybe Rachel had sent her. Spring came late to the Tennessee mountains. It crept in cautiously, melting the snow inch by inch, coaxing green from the frost-bitten earth like a whispered promise. The cabin, once bowed beneath silence and ice, now exhaled soft creaks of life. Ethan stood by the window, arms crossed over his chest, watching the first robins flit across the yard. Behind him, the wood stove popped gently, casting waves of warmth across the cabin. Amelia was on the floor, legs folded beneath her, sketching. She hadn't put the pencil down in days. It had started with Doodle's Maple sleeping, the pups tumbling over one another, and evolved into full drawings. Whole pages of movement and memory poured out of her small hands. It was the most she'd expressed since Rachel's passing. And Ethan noticed something else. She was humming. Quiet, soft, but undeniably alive. Maple lay nearby, her head resting on her paws, eyes half closed in a kind of peaceful alertness. Her limp remained, a scar from whatever nightmare she'd escaped, but it no longer slowed her. She patrolled the edge of the yard now like she owned it. The pups, growing by the day, chased each other clumsily through the wet grass and leftover snow. Ethan stepped outside, boots crunching on thawing earth. The old porch still groaned under his weight, but it no longer felt like it would collapse. He had reinforced it last week with scrap wood and a borrowed hammer. His hands were cracked and sore, but he welcomed the pain it meant something was being rebuilt. That morning, he and Amelia had made their first trip into town together, not for groceries, for supplies, sketchbooks, colored pencils, paper. The woman behind the counter, Marjorie, ran the small art supply store on Main Street, late 50s, silver hair pulled into a no-nonsense bun, eyes bright and kind. She took one look at Amelia's smudged fingers and lit up. "You've got an artist's hands, sweetheart," she said, gently brushing back a lock of Amelia's hair. "Let's find you something special." Ethan had watched from a distance, unsure whether to step in. He didn't need help. Not really. But when Marjorie knelt beside his daughter and asked her name, and Amelia answered clearly, Amelia Walker, he nearly dropped the tin of charcoal pencils he was holding. Later that afternoon, they'd returned to the cabin, arms full of art supplies and something else even more precious momentum. Inside, the light changed. The shadows didn't feel as long. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was space, waiting to be filled. That evening, Ethan sat with a notebook of his own. Not for sketches, his hands weren't built for that, but for planning. He'd begun to draw up a simple structure outside a small open-air pen, a training circle, maybe even a space for community visits. Because Maple wasn't just a stray, she was trained, disciplined, patient, and the way she watched over Amelia, the way she positioned herself between the child and the door, spoke louder than barking ever could. Ethan saw a possibility he hadn't dared imagine in years. Purpose. The next week, he brought the idea to Marjorie over coffee at the general store's back patio. "Training dogs?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Therapy dogs," he replied. "For veterans, maybe for kids too. Maple's already doing the work. I just want to give her a place to do it." Marjorie didn't blink. "I'll help however I can." Word spread slowly, as it always does in small towns. A few folks came by to meet Maple, then a few more. One day, Tom Alvarez, a retired Marine who rarely left his house, showed up unannounced. He said nothing at first, just stood on the edge of the clearing, watching. Maple walked to him without hesitation. She didn't jump. She didn't bark. She just leaned her head against his thigh, gentle and steady. "And Tom," he cried. Ethan didn't say a word. He just nodded, understanding more in that moment than he could ever put into language. Soon, the cabin grounds turned into something else. A refuge. Veterans came by to walk with the pups. Children laughed while Maple trotted alongside them like a guardian. And Amelia, she bloomed. Her drawings lined the inside walls of the cabin now, colorful memories taped beside old photographs of Rachel. Ethan found himself smiling more. Breathing easier? One afternoon, as he packed away tools beside the porch, Amelia skipped over and tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she said, eyes glowing, "can we name the training circle after Mom?" He swallowed the lump in his throat. "What would you call it?" She grinned. "The Rachel ring." And just like that, grief turned into legacy. Summer arrived like a quiet victory. The mountain air, once sharp and unforgiving, now carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. The cabin that once echoed with loneliness had transformed slowly, stubbornly into a place that felt alive. The garden out back had sprouted with bean vines and clumsy rows of carrots. The porch no longer sagged. The roof, patched by Ethan's own hands, no longer leaked when the rain came. But the greatest change couldn't be measured by hammers or seeds. It was Amelia. Every morning. She rose with the sun, her hair pulled back in a messy braid, boots caked in dew and dirt. She took to the garden first, whispering to the sprouts like they were old friends. Then she'd gather the pups, now stronger, faster, full of mischief, and run drills with them in the Rachel ring, the small circle Ethan had built and named at her request. Her voice, once locked away in silence, now rang clear across the yard. Laughter, commands, encouragement. Sometimes Ethan would pause mid-task just to listen. It was the most beautiful sound in the world. Grace, once just Maple, now affectionately renamed by the whole town, had become a legend. Her limp had lessened, though it never disappeared. But she wore it like a badge of honor. She patrolled the edge of the property with quiet purpose, ever watchful, never wavering. When veterans visited, some walking slowly with canes, others with haunted eyes, Grace greeted them with the same reverence she had shown Amelia on that first day. And Ethan, he had changed too. The tension in his shoulders had eased. His eyes, once rimmed with grief, had regained a steady calm. He still missed Rachel every morning, every night, but the memories no longer strangled him. They sat beside him now, quiet and warm, like old friends who knew not to speak unless needed. Each afternoon, he trained the pups 3 growing shepherds, now full of energy and intelligence. He'd assign one to a visiting vet, teaching them not just obedience, but trust. One man, a Vietnam vet named Walt, came every week just to sit in the grass with a dog named Scout curled at his side. He never said much, but Ethan knew that kind of quiet. It meant healing was happening. Amelia had her own project too. She'd started painting the inside of the cabin walls. Not just drawings anymore, murals. One corner showed Grace and her pups curled by the fire, surrounded by mountain trees. Another held a portrait of Rachel, painted from memory, soft brown hair, warm eyes, a smile that looked like it still lived in the room, above the window. Amelia had written in careful script, "Even broken things can bloom again." Ethan traced the words one night after she'd gone to bed, fingers brushing the painted letters like prayer beads. He hadn't realized how much he needed to believe that. One Saturday afternoon, after a full day of dog training and garden chores, Ethan found Amelia sitting on the porch swing, sketchbook in her lap. Grace lay beside her, chin resting on her paws, eyes half closed in contentment. "What you working on?" he asked, easing down beside her. Amelia held up the page. It was a drawing of the cabin, but not the way it looked now. It showed how it had looked when they arrived, broken, snow-covered, shadowed. But around it, she had drawn small things, seeds in the ground, a lantern lit in the window, a fox plush sitting on the porch steps, signs of life, of hope. "It's called Before We Knew," she said softly. Ethan blinked back the sting in his eyes. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She looked at him, smile gentle. "Do you think maybe Mom brought us here on purpose?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at Grace, still watchful even in rest, at the pups, now rolling in the grass like they owned the place, at his daughter, who had returned to him not all at once, but piece by piece. "Yeah," he said finally, "I think she did." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel heavy anymore. Just full. The cabin groaned slightly as the breeze rolled through the trees. Birds called in the distance, somewhere inside. A kettle whistled faintly, forgotten on the stove. Ethan smiled, stretched his arm around Amelia's shoulders, and leaned back. He wasn't a soldier anymore. Not just a grieving husband. Not just a father trying not to fail. He was home. And maybe this was what Grace really looked like, not loud, not dazzling, but steady, quiet, unshakable. Like a dog who wouldn't stop watching the door, like a child who decided to speak again, like a man who had given up on second chances and then found his waiting on a cabin floor. By the time the summer festival rolled around, the little town at the foot of the Tennessee hills had already embraced the Walkers as their own. Ethan hadn't planned to attend. Crowds weren't really his thing anymore, not since the war, not since the funeral. But when Marjorie came by the cabin and said, "They've added a last-minute spot for Amelia in the youth art showcase," he knew there was no way around it. Besides, Amelia had already packed her drawing. They rode into town in the same rusty Chevy that had once carried them toward an uncertain future. Now, it felt different, like a vessel of stories, of beginnings. Amelia clutched her sketchpad on her lap the whole way, her thumb tracing the edge of the paper. Grace sat in the back seat, head out the window, her ears flapping in the wind. The 3 pups, now nearly full-grown, traveled in the truck bed with their heads poking over the side, tails wagging like banners. The town square was buzzing. String lights looped from booth to booth. The air smelled like cinnamon pies and roasted peanuts, and children dashed through the grass with painted faces and sticky fingers. For a moment, Ethan paused at the edge of it all, unsure. So much noise. So much life. And then Amelia slipped her hand into his. "Come on," she said simply. Inside the community hall, rows of artwork lined the walls, watercolors of mountains, pencil sketches of birds, crayon drawings of family dinners. Ethan spotted Amelia's piece immediately. It stood out not because it was flashy, but because it felt quiet, strong. It showed Grace lying beneath a tree, the pups curled beside her. Behind them, the cabin stood in soft pencil strokes, golden light spilling from the window. The title was written in her careful handwriting, "The Day She Saved Us." Ethan felt the breath leave his chest. Not the day they saved her, the day she saved them. He looked down at his daughter, now tugging nervously at her braid. "Your mom would be proud," he whispered. She looked up, eyes shining. "You think so?" He nodded, fighting the lump in his throat. "I know so." When they announced her name as the first-place winner, Amelia didn't move at first. Then she turned to Ethan, eyes wide, and whispered, "What do I do?" He smiled, bent low, and said, "Just speak from your heart." She stepped onto the small wooden stage, her sketchbook still in her arms. Grace padded up behind her and sat at her side, calm as stone. The crowd quieted. Amelia took a deep breath. "My mom used to tell me," she began, voice trembling but growing stronger with each word, "that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses love even when it's hard." She looked down at Grace, her hand resting on the dog's scarred back. "When we came to the cabin, I didn't talk. I didn't even feel like me anymore. Then we found her hurt, hiding, protecting her babies. She should have been afraid of us, but she wasn't. She stayed. She let us help." Amelia's voice cracked slightly. "And when I saw her, I saw myself. You could have heard a pin drop. She didn't just heal because we saved her. We started healing because she let us." The room remained silent for a heartbeat, then erupted into applause. Not the polite kind. The kind that rises from deep inside people, the kind that means something. Veterans in the crowd stood quietly, some saluting. Parents wiped tears from their cheeks. Children pointed and clapped, unaware they were witnessing something sacred. Ethan stood at the back, heart wide open, hands trembling not from nerves, but from awe. Amelia had returned to him, and he hadn't even realized when it happened. Maybe it was the moment she whispered Maple. Maybe it was the first time she laughed again, or maybe it was just now, on that stage, where her voice reached people the way his never could. After the ceremony, as the sky turned lavender and the lights twinkled overhead, they made their way back to the cabin. The ride home was quiet, peaceful. Grace snored gently in the back seat. One pup had fallen asleep with his head on Amelia's lap. And Ethan. He felt something settle in his chest. Not sadness, not even pride. Something deeper. Gratitude. They reached the cabin just as the last light dipped behind the hills. The porch lantern cast a soft glow across the yard. Fireflies floated like tiny lanterns in the trees. They didn't rush inside. Instead, they sat on the porch steps. Amelia leaned against Ethan's arm, sketchpad still on her lap. Grace lay at their feet, head resting between her paws, ears twitching. Ethan looked up at the sky. "You think she sees us?" he asked. Amelia didn't hesitate. "I think she sent us here." Ethan closed his eyes, let the words wrap around him. Maybe she had. Maybe the cabin hadn't just been a $5 miracle. Maybe it had been part of Rachel's last gift, a place for them to break, to bleed, to be found again, and to become something new, something stronger, together. Sometimes healing doesn't come wrapped in answers. It comes in silence, in scars, in the quiet presence of something or someone who simply refuses to give up on you. Ethan and Amelia didn't set out to find redemption. They weren't chasing hope. They were just trying to escape their pain, to survive grief the only way they knew how, by running. But what they found, buried beneath a broken cabin floor, wasn't just a wounded dog. It was a symbol, a living reminder that even in brokenness, there's purpose. Even in silence, there's a voice waiting to return. Grace, scarred, limping, but fiercely loyal, showed them that love doesn't have to be perfect to be powerful. That family is not defined by blood, but by those who stay, those who protect, those who keep showing up when the world walks away. In the end, the cabin didn't save them. They saved each other. If this story moved you, Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you won't miss what's next. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. It truly helps us grow. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.